We have snacks, coffee, and crashes eating through the workday. So I think many of us try to get through the workday with our caffeine and carbs and then wonder why we're on the struggle bus. And so looking forward to what these students from our wonderful nutritional sciences department from the College of Allied Health on the OU Health campus have for us some tips, some strategies, some great things that we can take away and put in place as we leave here today, and really looking forward to the great information. So thank you so much.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm Caitlin. I'm here with Tracy and Mesa off screen. They'll be in a second. But our session is called Snacks, Coffee, and Crashes, Eating Through the Workday. And as Lindsay mentioned, I think it already captures something a lot of us may experience on a daily basis. And before we get into any of the actual content, we want to start with like a quick check-in just to get a sense of what a real workday may look like for everyone in the Zoom. So if you could use the chat box to post which best, well, okay, yeah. If you could go ahead and post in the chat which best describes what you ate in the first 3 to 4 hours after waking today. So there's a full meal, snack only, caffeine, caffeine and a full meal, caffeine and snack, nothing, or something else. Yeah, we'll give you a couple minutes to go ahead and post that. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of caffeine. Hey, caffeine and full meal, snack, nothings. Okay, well, as you can see, there's a lot of different mixes of what people ate so far. So this is exactly why we're having this conversation because there's a wide range of patterns, and most of them are unintentional. They're shaped by schedules, meetings, commuting, and just trying to get through that busy day. So our goal for this session today is not to tell you what you should be doing, but to help you start recognizing your own patterns. And hopefully by the end of the session, we want you to feel more confident in identifying how your workday eating habits, things like your meal timing, snacking, caffeine use, are influencing your energy and focus, and how you can make small, realistic adjustments to support more stable energy throughout the day. Okay, so eating on the clock. And before we get into like more content, I do want to preface that this isn't necessarily like a nutrition lecture, and it's not about telling you what exactly you should be eating. No perfect schedule, no one size fits all, especially in like the staff setting where every day can look like completely different. But we do want to focus on something a little more practical, your eating patterns. So not just what you eat, but how your day actually unfolds when you eat, how often, and even why certain choices happen during like a busy work day. And our main goal is like awareness. If you can start to recognize your own eating patterns and how they maybe connect to energy and focus, then like the small adjustments may become a lot easier. Okay, so why eating patterns matter. So when we talk about eating patterns, we're really talking about like the rhythm of food and drinks across your day. So it's not just main meals, it's the coffee, snacks, long gaps, quick bites before meetings. All of that creates a food pattern. And this pattern has an actual direct impact on things that matter during the workday. So your energy stability, the ability to focus, and even how you make decisions later in the day. And what's important here is that there are a lot of afternoon crashes or dips in focus, and it's not just about like what you ate. They're often about like when you ate or maybe when you didn't eat. So even small shifts in timing can make like a noticeable difference in how steady your energy feels throughout the day and have a big effect on performance. Okay, barrier breakdown. So, of course, in a perfect world, we'd all have consistent meals spaced out nicely, but that's not really a reality for most people here. Schedules do come with many real barriers. So, perhaps you have back-to-back classes, meetings, there's just like no time to sit down or eat, or even commuting can take up time that could have been used for meal prepping. And there's also that workflow piece. So answering your emails, finishing your task, and that mindset of I'll eat when I'm done. But the challenge is, are you ever really done? And then there's also prioritization. So I know Dr. Elliott mentioned sometimes she'll like to opt for maybe going on a quick little walk just to get some movement in or finish something else instead of eating. And that's not a bad thing. It's realistic. Skipping a meal occasionally isn't a failure. It's just the decision in that moment. So it's normal, but the issue is when it starts to become like a default pattern every day, because that's when we start to see those more consistent dips in energy and focus. Okay, so we talked about eating patterns, and there are some common workday eating patterns that show up during the workday, and you might be able to recognize some of these in yourself. So, one example of a common workday eating pattern would be delayed first meal. So, I saw in the chat some of y'all started off with caffeine today, which is normal. I did too. So, the delayed first meal would be starting with coffee and not having your real first meal until like late morning or like noon. And then there's also marathon gap. So you might have lunch around midday and then you wait until you get home after work to have dinner. And there's like a really long stretch with that fuel in between. There's also the night shift eater. So this would be eating like pretty light during the workday, and then most of the food happens in the evening after everything is done. Another common workday eating pattern may be the grazer. So you're not eating any full meals, but you're like snacking on small things throughout the day. And then lastly, another common workday eating pattern is the caffeine replacement. So coffee or other caffeinated beverages are kind of filling in for actual food, especially earlier in the day. And none of these are bad patterns necessarily. They usually just make sense given the structure of the day and your specific schedule, but they actually do have an effect on how your energy holds up throughout the day. So, after hearing all of these common workday eating patterns, do any of these describe you? If you guys could post in the chat to see if these you recognize yourself in any of these. Seeing some grazers. Oh yeah, that's a good point. You can also, you don't have to fall into like one eating pattern. Someone said that they actually fall into like a lot of them. So yeah, depending on your schedule, your day. Marathon gap, grazer. Okay, perfect. And then, as I mentioned, that your eating pattern impacts your energy. So, what we tend to see with these patterns is a consistent set of outcomes. So, there are things like afternoon crashes, difficulty focusing, maybe feeling a little irritable, or just like mental fog that makes it harder to stay on task. And often, this isn't like a willpower issue. It's not about being like disciplined enough. It's usually just fuel timing issue. So, like, if your body is going long stretches without energy or maybe relying heavily on caffeine early, it makes sense that there's going to be that drop off later in energy. So, again, the goal isn't to completely overhaul your day, it's just noticing your patterns. When is my first real source of fuel coming in? How long are the gaps between eating? Am I relying on caffeine to carry me through? those small awareness points can already start to explain a lot of what you're feeling later in the day. So now that we kind of talked about different eating patterns, like in real life, the next question is what's actually happening in the body when an afternoon crash hits? So next, Mesa is actually going to connect the patterns to what's happening with things like blood sugar, caffeine, energy regulations, and why those crashes feel the way that they do.
Thank you, Caitlin. So what I want to do in this section is kind of zoom in on the why behind what she just walked us through, because a lot of us have experienced that moment in the workday where our energy drops, we can't focus, and then coffee kind of feels like the only solution we have. And even though those moments feel like they come out of nowhere, they aren't random. There are very predictable things happening in our body that kind of drive that response. Now, my goal here is not to make anyone into a biochemist. It's simply to kind of make those patterns a little bit easier to understand so that when we talk about strategies later to combat them, those feel a little bit more logical. So, when we talk about energy at work, what we're really talking about is mental energy, the work that your brain is putting in. And your brain is very demanding when it comes to fuel. It relies heavily on a steady supply of blood sugar, which comes from the foods that we eat, especially carbohydrates like grains, fruit, and dairy. But here's the key piece. It's not just about having the fuel, it's about how stable that fuel is across the day. So if blood sugar is constantly spiking and dropping, your energy kind of tends to follow that same pattern. But when it stays more steady, your mental energy feels more consistent as well. Now, I decided to experiment on myself for a week with a continuous glucose monitor and try a couple of different things out. And here I'm sharing the results from a couple of days where I tried some different tests. So in this first picture, I started my day with some wonderful avocado toast in the morning with some hard-boiled eggs and chicken sausage. And you can see how my blood sugar rose throughout the morning, but it stayed relatively even. And my energy levels did the same. I felt very steady that day. In comparison to another day, not only did I delay my breakfast for a couple of hours, but I simply had a plain bagel with some butter and nothing else. And then for lunch, I had this really large serving of chicken noodle soup with a baguette and a chocolate chip cookie. And you can see how drastic my glucose readings were after those different meals, with very large, sharp spikes and falls. And what my energy felt like that day was very similar to my glucose reading. So as you can see by the little bed icon, I had to take a nap in the middle of the day because I felt so mentally exhausted because my glucose was all over the place. And this is kind of a big picture overview of the importance of steady fueling throughout your day. Now, I just mentioned having longer gaps between our meals, which Caitlin also discussed as this typical pattern that we see in long work days. It's really common. You might have breakfast early in the morning, you get pulled into meetings and you skip lunch without meaning to, and then suddenly it's late afternoon and you realize you haven't eaten in hours. Or sometimes it's a little bit more intentional, right? Like your cousin tells you about intermittent fasting and you want to try it out, and then it ends up turning into unintentionally underfueling during your day. Now, your body is very good at keeping your blood sugar within that normal range. It has these backup systems, so to speak. So when you're not eating, it kind of pulls from your stored energy, primarily from your liver. But what studies have shown is that longer gaps due to these skipped or delayed meals leads to those greater glucose spikes and falls after your next meal. And this effect is particularly worse when we skip lunch. So meaning we might not feel it during our work day, but then once we get home and we eat dinner, the rest of our night feels needlessly exhausting. Now, hopefully you're saying, okay, sure, that makes sense. I've been in a food coma after dinner before, and my night is practically done after that. But why do I feel so exhausted in the mid-afternoon? Thank you for asking. It's a great question. That phenomenon is what's commonly referred to as the afternoon crash, and it's really important because it's not always just about food. So your body runs on a 24-hour clock called your circadian rhythm, which regulates your sleep and alertness primarily through certain hormones. And for most people, there's a natural dip in your alertness in the early to mid-afternoon. That dip is completely normal, but what determines how intense it feels for you is everything that came before it. So if earlier in the day there were those long gaps between meals or meals that didn't provide that sustained energy, your body may already be running low on readily available fuel. And so now you have these two things happening at the same time. You have this natural biological dip in alertness, plus you have that less stable or lower blood sugar. And when those stack together, that's when people feel that really classic 2 to 3 p.m. crash that feels like coffee is the only solution. So again, it's not random, it's your physiology kind of interacting with the patterns that you've established. And this is where snacking can actually be a really helpful tool. So snacks tend to get a bad reputation mainly because the snack foods that we kind of reach for tend to be these ultra processed and nutrient poor snacks. But when they're intentional, they can help stabilize your energy across the day. And I find it helpful to think of them kind of like a bridge between meals. So if you know there's going to be a long gap in your workday, a snack can provide that additional fuel so your brain isn't entirely relying on its backup systems. But as I mentioned, we have to be intentional here. The type of snack that we grab matters a lot. And what I like to say is this really kitschy phrase that you shouldn't eat naked carbs. What I mean by that is we want to eat our carbs with protein, fiber, or healthy fats, rarely by themselves. In other words, we want to clothe them instead of eating them naked. And the reason why is because snacks that include this protein or fiber digest slower and help provide that more sustained energy, whereas snacks that are mostly naked refined carbs digest much quicker, which can lead into that faster rise and fall in blood sugar. And what that often translates to for us is that feeling of hunger really quickly again afterwards, or experiencing another dip in energy not long after that snack. So it's not about avoiding snacks, it's about using them in a way that actually supports our energy rather than working against us. Now, I might make some people mad on this slide. Dr. Elliott always jokes that if someone tells her to stop drinking coffee, it might be the end of the world. I'm not here to take away your coffee, but I am here to kind of offer some potential guardrails for your consideration. So, caffeine works by interacting with the brain in a really interesting way. Throughout your day, your brain is building up this compound called adenosine that creates this feeling of pressure to rest, essentially signaling fatigue or sleepiness. So, caffeine temporarily blocks that signal, which is why you feel more alert after drinking coffee. So, it can absolutely increase your focus in the short term. But here's the important distinction: caffeine changes how you feel, but it doesn't provide fuel. So, if the body is low on energy, caffeine can temporarily mask that feeling, but it doesn't solve the underlying need of food. And so, in some cases, it can actually delay eating because it suppresses our appetite. So, someone might skip a meal in lieu of their coffee. They feel okay for a while, and then they experience this stronger crash later when the caffeine wears off and the body is still asking for food. Again, coffee isn't the problem. It just works best when it's paired with adequate food intake, not used in place of it. So that's my first guardrail for caffeine, just to make sure you're eating something alongside it. Hopefully you can put down your pitchforks now. My second guardrail for caffeine consumption actually has to do with our meal timing across the day. So this is a piece that often gets overlooked when we talk about daily energy coming from nutrition. And that's simply because it doesn't just start in our morning, it starts the night before. So when we stop eating for the evening, our body enters into this overnight fast, which is normal. It's a healthy process. It gives our body time to reset. But if our last meal is really late at night, that window becomes shorter and it can impact our digestion and sleep in really big ways. And for a lot of people, these fluctuations can influence how hungry we are, how alert we feel, and even what foods we crave the next day. Studies have consistently shown that a poor night's sleep can make us eat 400 to 600 more calories the next day, and we tend to grab those nutrient poor foods when we're overeating. So a good rule of thumb here to protect our sleep is to stop eating 2 to 3 hours before bed. And as promised, here's my second caffeine guardrail: to stop caffeine consumption 5 to 10 hours before bed. Now, the reason why there's a larger variance here is due to how quickly some people can metabolize caffeine. I'm someone who has to stop drinking coffee by 10 or 11 a.m. My husband can drink coffee at 6 p.m. and still fall asleep like a baby with no disruptions. So you can play around with it within reason, find what works for you. But what we're really seeing here is that our energy across your workday is not driven by a single choice. It's the result of this pattern that starts the night before and it continues throughout our day with our meals, snacks, and caffeine. Now, before we move into strategies, I'd love to hear from you guys. So in the chat, what is one thing that affects your energy more than you realized before this talk? Yeah. Late meals in the recovery window. Yeah. Yeah. Late meals. Yeah. That one's a big one. So, like I said, that kind of just impacts how well we sleep. And so just to quickly summarize here, energy dips are not random. They're predictable physiological responses. And the afternoon crash is normal, but how intense it feels for you kind of depends on how you've fueled earlier in the day. And our snacks and our caffeine, they don't act independently, they interact with our meal timing. And so now that we've kind of understood what's happening under the surface, under the hood, so to speak, Tracy's going to talk about the strategies behind how to actually use that to our advantage in a busy workday.
Thank you, Mesa. All right, so building on what we just talked about, we've seen how things like meal timing, caffeine, and blood sugar patterns can affect our energy throughout the day. So what I want to focus on now is how we can take that information and really apply it to a busy workday. Because understanding the why is important, but the next step is figuring out like what it looks like in a real workday. So instead of focusing on the perfect eating pattern, this section is about making simple and realistic choices. So what helps most isn't a strict plan, but rather having a few simple decision rules that can help you in the moment. So these are quick ways to ask what might support my energy right now. So first, if it's been about 4 to 5 hours since you've eaten, your body may be ready for more fuel. So instead of immediately reaching for that coffee, it might help to eat first, even if it's something small. So second, if your energy is dipping, but you're not super hungry, that's usually a good time for a balanced snack as well. Third, a lot of people rely on caffeine to stay focused, especially during a busy workday, but it can be helpful if you pair it with food first. That combination tends to help you feel more steady. And if meetings or classes are blocking meals, instead of skipping completely, you can use a bridge snack to help carry you through. And if you notice you're feeling really hungry, that can also be a helpful sign to check earlier in the day and notice where the longer gap was. So these aren't rules that you have to follow perfectly. They're just flexible tools to help guide your decisions throughout the day. So when we say balanced snack, what does that actually mean? It's really just about combining a carbohydrate with a protein and a fat. So carbs give you that quick energy, but protein and fat help slow that digestion and keep your energy more steady. So you can see a couple of the examples on the slides, like apples with peanut butter, yogurt and granola, tuna and crackers, or trail mix. So for example, if you just had crackers, you might get that quick energy, but you might feel hungry again soon later. So pairing it with something like tuna can help you feel more stable and help that energy last longer. So the same idea applies to all of these combinations. You're pairing something quick with something to help sustain it. And overall, it's less about the specific food and more about how you combine it to support your energy throughout the day. So let's apply this to real work days, starting with the heavy teaching days. So these are the days where you're talking continuously and breaks can be limited. So it can be harder to find time to eat during the middle of the day. So one helpful approach may be eating before the teaching block starts. And even if you're not especially hungry in that moment, it can help to eat since you might not know when your next time would be. And having something small and available can also help support you if you need. So next are the desk or meeting heavy days, and these are the days when meetings are stacked or you might have meals provided, but it's not always balanced. So you might have something to eat, but it might not support your energy for the rest of the afternoon. So one simple strategy is keeping something reliable nearby, like in your desk or your bag. And if a meal is mostly carbs, just adding something like protein or fat can make it more satisfying. And then we have the on-the-go days, and these are the days where you're commuting or moving from between locations and access might be more limited. So it can be a little harder to build a balanced option in those moments. So one realistic step is packing one non-perishable snack before you leave, and even briefly thinking ahead about where you'll be midday can make things a little smoother. So when talking about planning, this doesn't mean meal prepping your entire week. It can be as simple as noticing where does my day tend to get more challenging or where my longest gap is. So for example, if you have a long afternoon meeting, that might be a helpful place to keep a snack in your bag or your desk. So planning here is really just about making things easier and more supportive. So this isn't about one perfect meal, but about how your day is structured. So eating earlier sets your baseline, avoiding long gaps keeps your energy steady, and snacks help bridge those delays. So before we move into the activity, I want you to think about this. Which of these feels like the most realistic win for your next busy workday? Putting one shelf-stable snack in my bag or desk, pairing caffeine with food at least once, or noticing where my longest gap usually is, or D, honestly, just surviving. Go ahead and drop your answer in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of C's and A's and B's. So notice this isn't about doing everything at once, but just choosing something that feels the most realistic and supportive for you. And that's exactly what we're going to practice next.
Okay, so now that we've kind of been given this crash course in how to maintain our cognitive energy throughout our workday and to avoid that dreaded afternoon crash, we're going to put it into practice with this quick activity. So for the first round, there's going to be 2 rounds. For this first round, you're going to be given a short description of a workday scenario, and you're going to decide what you should do to help. Your answers will be to grab a snack, eat a full meal, perk up with some caffeine, or some kind of combination. Those answer choices will be on the screen, so you don't have to remember them. We're going to give you about 30 seconds to send your answer in the chat, so get your chat boxes open and your typing fingers ready. All right, let's look at the first scenario. You ate breakfast at 7 a.m. It's now 11:30 a.m. and you have meetings until 2 p.m. You're starting to feel distracted. What should you do? Snack, meal, caffeine, or combo? Lots of snacks. Meal, okay. Snack, meal. Okay. Yeah. So the key thing happening in this scenario is that there's been this long gap without any real food for the body. So even though coffee might, which great, no one put coffee. Even though coffee might feel helpful in the moment, this is a situation where we need food, and a lot of you got that. So most people here would benefit from at least a snack if they aren't able to swing a full meal during their meetings or in between.
Okay, scenario 2. Let's try another one. It's 3 p.m. You had a light lunch at noon, and your energy is starting to dip. So what should you do? Snack, meal, caffeine, or a combination? You can post in the chat. Oh, a lot of snacks. It's all going really fast. Snacks, snack combo. I think I saw a caffeine. Oh, there's the caffeine. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of snacks and a few combos. So this one is a little trickier. So this is more of a natural circadian dip, not a major fueling issue. So in this case, you may opt for like a small snack, but in this situation where a little caffeine may be appropriate, especially if we pair it with the snack, because again, it's a natural dip that we're working with.
Okay, for scenario 3, you ate a balanced lunch at 12:30. It's now 1:30, and you want to stay sharp for an important meeting. What should you do? Snack, meal, caffeine, or combination? I'm seeing a lot of caffeine. Okay, yes. So because you just ate a balanced meal, your energy is already supported. So this isn't really a fuel issue. It's more about alertness. And this is where something like caffeine can help enhance your focus without adding more food.
Okay, scenario 4. This one might be a little bit trickier, but you guys got this. So it's 4 p.m. You're tired. You still have work to finish. You haven't eaten since lunch at noon. What should you do? Snack, meal, caffeine, or combination? Meal, snack. Go home and make dinner. Yeah. Combination. Okay. A little bit. Yeah. Dinner, snack and coffee, dinner soon. Yeah, okay, so at this point, it's been several hours since you've eaten, so your body likely needs fuel. You guys are right that you're wanting a snack or a meal of some sort. Caffeine alone might make you feel alert temporarily, but it doesn't kind of address that underlying need, and it might actually contribute to worse sleep tonight since it is so late in the day. So although it's tempting, we say a small snack that's not going to ruin dinner would probably help the most here. Another quick tip that we didn't really talk about is sometimes just getting some blood flow is all you need to perk up in the late afternoon. So some simple stretches at your desk or a walk around the office to go get your balanced snack might be all that you need to kind of finish the day strong. Okay, so our second round, this is where you're going to try to spot the factor that caused the afternoon crash. Same rules apply. You'll have about 30 seconds to send your answer in the chat, but we're going to have 4 answer choices on the screen listed as A, B, C, or D. So here is scenario 1. 7 a.m., you only had coffee. 12:30, you had a quick lunch that was mostly carbs. 2:30, you're feeling that energy crash, so you grab some caffeine at 3. What caused the crash? Not enough caffeine, a long gap without real fuel, afternoon circadian dip only, or just a normal energy drop? Lots of B's. Long gap without real fuel. Yeah, this is great. So most of you realize that the crash did not start at 2:30 p.m. It started much earlier in our day. We're going from this morning coffee to a delayed low protein lunch, which created this situation where your energy became more unstable. So the correct answer here is going to be B, that long gap without real food for fuel.
Okay, scenario 2. 8 a.m. you had a balanced breakfast, 12 p.m. balanced lunch, 1 p.m. you had some caffeine, and then 3:30 p.m. there's a slight dip in energy. So, what caused the crash? A, poor nutrition, B, circadian rhythm dip, C, too much caffeine, or D, skipping meals. Got some B's. Yes, bees. Okay. Yes, this scenario is important because not every dip actually means something is wrong, even with great habits. As you can see, balanced breakfast, balanced lunch. There's a natural dip in alertness in the early afternoons. So we were looking for answer choice B, so good job. A natural circadian rhythm dip. We can't prevent all of them, but the goal here is to make them less off-putting when they actually occur.
Okay, scenario 3. At 8 a.m., you had coffee and a small breakfast. At 12 p.m., a balanced lunch. At 1 p.m., you had coffee. 2:30, a sweet snack. And then 4 is whenever you start to feel that energy crash. So, what caused the crash? Too much caffeine overall, afternoon circadian dip, snack composition, or lunch timing? I'm seeing mostly C's. So, yes, the afternoon snack gave us a quick boost, but without protein or fiber to help slow things down, energy can drop more quickly afterwards. So, instead of smoothing out the afternoon, it actually contributed to more of a fluctuation.
Okay, and here's our last but not least scenario 4. 8 a.m., we skipped breakfast. 9 a.m., we had coffee. 12 p.m., we had a balanced lunch. followed by our coffee again at 1 p.m. And then 3 o'clock, we had this energy crash and we're feeling jittery. What caused the crash? Not enough total calories, too much caffeine relative to food, circadian rhythm dip, or our lunch timing. Yes, absolutely. So our lunch was solid. The timing isn't terrible here, but we started our day without any food, and then we added that caffeine really early. So then that added, and then we added more caffeine shortly after lunch. So now we have this situation where our stimulation is really high in comparison to the actual fuel that we received earlier in the day. And that combination leads to that tired but wired feeling where we feel really jittery. And so the issue here isn't just about caffeine alone, it's the caffeine that we didn't have with enough consistent fuel alongside of it. So we hope that after that activity, you kind of notice this theme that we've said throughout all of our presentation, which is that our energy is not made in the moment. It's this sequence of our decisions throughout the day and sometimes even the night before. And like we said, energy dips during the workday are not random, they're predictable responses. Typically, what matters most is not just what we eat, but when and how we eat. Your brain relies on that steady supply of fuel, so long gaps or unbalanced meals can lead to those high highs and those low crashes that we talked about. And then finally, small realistic adjustments like adding that balanced snack, spacing our meals more consistently, or pairing our caffeine with food can make a really big difference in how your energy feels throughout the day. So we want to emphasize that this is not about being perfect. It's just about bringing more awareness to the patterns that you have and making one or two small changes that work for your schedule. So the next time you feel that afternoon crash coming on, you won't be asking, why am I so tired? You're going to be asking, how have I fueled today? And how can I overcome this based off of what I've learned in this talk? And so with that, we are happy to answer any questions, either in the chat or unmuted.
Yeah, and as some are maybe typing in their questions in the chat, just kind of wanted to point out some things I think that you guys said that encourage those attending to kind of keep in mind that, yeah, sometimes we encounter those longer meetings. Like we already know that it's been put on the calendar and it may be a 2 hour meeting, and we're like, oh my goodness. Well, if we already know that's going to happen, and maybe we're the ones planning that long meeting, that maybe being aware and having snacks available, so certainly if it's an in-person meeting, hopefully maybe think about, hey, I'll have some snacks available that are healthy, on the healthier side, include carbs and protein to help those that maybe start having that dip, and we can keep that focus. So some of those things that, even whenever we have to have those longer meetings, that they're just inevitable, that also think about, okay, well, how can we set ourselves up to still be successful in offering some of those things if not everyone can come prepared with it. Some of those also throwing in the chat, what is the difference between a light lunch and a balanced lunch?
Okay, so what's the difference between a light lunch and a balanced lunch? I would say probably the composition of your lunch. So a light lunch may be only carbohydrates. A balanced lunch would be like multiple macronutrients. Ideally, you are having a protein source, a carbohydrate source, and a fat source. And I would say a light lunch might be not necessarily missing one of those factors, but maybe like in lesser quantity. That would be the difference between probably a light lunch and a balanced lunch. So for example, maybe a balanced lunch would just be like a salad and you have protein in it. So you can have like chicken in it as well. And then a light lunch might just be the salad without protein.
Yeah, no, it
And
could
another
probably be dependent on the person as well.
Yeah.
What might be light for one person is, pretty
Yes.
standard for another. So goes by the person as well, you bet.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the next question was, what are the ideal times between eating meals? And like Lindsay just said, this also depends on the person. You might be someone who gets hungry after 2, 3 hours after a meal, and you need a snack to kind of hold you over until the next meal. But ideally, like with the timing between bedtime, that's a little bit more stated. You want that 2 to 3 hour gap between when you stop eating and when you go to bed. But for meal timing throughout the day, we want to eat when we first wake up and then have like maybe a 4 to 5 hour gap in between meals. And then, like I said, if you feel yourself getting hungry or having that energy dip in between that time frame, grabbing something like a balanced snack to hold you over but not ruin your appetite for that next meal.
And then someone also asked, or someone stated, sometimes my hunger is really just thirst, and some water will hold me over at the end of the day. I completely agree. I think I feel like I'm hungry sometimes, and it's actually just either boredom or thirst. So I tried to drink some water before I grab the food, but that's just, I think it's up to the person, obviously.
Someone asked what are non-perishable balanced snack examples. I would say granola bars are really good options. They they provide protein and they also help keep you full. And then another option is trail mix as well.
Yeah, and I'd add to those. I know it's kind of like we want it to be super easy, but also flipping it over and looking at the nutrition that not all granola bars are, the same. Some have a lot of added sugars, and others do a great job of not just packing it full of added sugar. So also, I'm sure you guys would say too, to encourage people to look at the nutrition label to see exactly what's in there as well, because not all trail mix is the same, not all granola bars are the same. And so sometimes we can kind of get tricked into that of what is considered, oh, this is a healthy option. And it may be packed with added sugars. So being careful with that.
Yes. Someone said added sugars are the culprit. Trying to avoid preservatives. I'm trying every day to avoid preservatives. It's very hard.
Yeah, but I mean, like Lindsay said, there's nutrition labels for a reason. We can take advocacy of our own health. We can read the labels, kind of get information for ourselves. And then I mean, there's also other non-packaged foods that we can have for snacks. We can pair an apple with some peanut butter or some almond butter, whatever your feng shui is. You can have, I think Tracy even mentioned like the tuna with crackers. Like you can find some really healthy crackers and pair that with a fatty fish like tuna. Or I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. I like sardines with my crackers. And that can hold over really well. You can put it in the fridge, or even just bring your can of sardines with you with some crackers, and that's non-perishable. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but there are options out there. And yes, Margaret said that the Yuka app is really great for finding the best foods to eat and kind of suggests alternatives to the ones that might have more added sugar or more preservatives that maybe aren't as great for you. So apples with cheese, yeah, that's great. And tuna packets with crackers, yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Well,
Okay.
thank you all. Yeah, a lot of great
Thank you.
information. Certainly some things for us, either reminders or things to think of to check in with ourselves and be a little bit more mindful when we're eating and just setting ourselves up, thinking about, okay, how do I want to feel 5 hours from now? And kind of keeping those things in mind and setting ourselves up for success and how we fuel ourselves so our days kind of play out a little bit better, hopefully for us, wherever we can, have a little bit of input and fueling with that. So yes, like everyone's saying, thank you and great job. And everyone enjoy the rest of your day.